Hello, everybody, and welcome to your post-daily news show for Monday, April the 18th. It's a brand new week here at postwrestling.com. A lot scheduled this week, and we are kicking things off, diving into a lot of the news coming out of this past week, but it is not me alone. Joining me for today's show to kick off the week, we are pleased to be joined by Bruce Lord, the man who was with me on Rewind at Dynamite last Wednesday and jumping on again here. Bruce, how are you? How was your weekend?
Doing fine. It was a weekend that was jam-packed, full of pro wrestling, of course. I kind of feel like I'm turning into kind of like the Lance Von Erich of the post wrestling family.
No.
Keep booking him. He'll eventually get over, But no, very happy to run through a pretty packed weekend of with a lot of events happening and a lot of news happening with regards to New Japan and AEW specifically.
Yes, you and I were covering the Saturday night shows on the site. I was watching Battle of the Belts live, and then you were diving into Windy City Riot. And I think we should start there with Windy City Riot. And if anyone wants to get their comments in, super chats, we'll be taking those at the end of the show if there are any. But chatting about Windy City Riot, there was a lot coming out of this that we can talk about. The continued working agreement that you have to see here of seeing AEW and New Japan, like just lots of interaction, a lot set up for next month. But there was also a lot of complaints about this show. What would you say, as you were writing this report, what was the biggest takeaway from Saturday's show as you came out of that event?
I mean, the really, the positive, the big picture, the more constructive part of me wants to say that, it really was a fantastic main event. And as you were saying, this really, as that main event points towards, a continued working relationship with New Japan and AEW. But the actual experience of watching the show live was very much hampered and dogged by all manner of constant streaming and audio buffering problems, feed interruptions, too many connections happening, all manner of audio and visual errors happening, at least on the fight stream of the show, which, I initially, as I was sort of, I'm writing up the event as it's happening and jotting down my notes and everything. And initially I was sort of panicking, sort of saying to myself, like, oh God, I think I missed about a minute and a half of the Ishii Suzuki match. What happened there? But bit by bit, it just sort of became apparent, well, this is part of the story of this card, unfortunately, and so that just kind of became part of what the event was about. Again, an unfortunate turn of events, given that it was overall a pretty enjoyable show. If you were, I imagine, in the crowd watching it live or watching it on the New Japan World feed.
Yeah, it was a struggle. I logged in for the last two matches, and I just had a hell of a time getting through. I must have been knocked off probably 10 times in among that last hour, which were your big matches. And it was to the point that New Japan, they even did issue an apology after the fact. They now you have since gone back and looked at the file that is up now on Fight TV, and it seems that they have cleaned up the episode.
Yeah, I've skimmed through it. I haven't watched the whole thing. I might rewatch the top two matches in their entirety just because they were really good matches, and it would be nice to see them completely uninterrupted. But yeah, I skimmed through it, watched the second half of Ishii and Suzuki, and yeah, the video problems are completely resolved. I think there were some kind of in-house audio issues that Kelly and Raywold may have been having just with their audio call, and some of that is still there. But on the whole, yes, it's now the version of it that is on Fight is a perfectly watchable version of it, definitely.
Yeah, it just seems it's one where we are at a point where I think that audiences, it's like at this point, there was a time where this was just so prevalent, like streaming issues. And we are very much in a streaming world now that I think people do believe that if I am dedicating my Saturday night, I expect I won't even say flawless stream, but not to the extent that you get on a Saturday night. And we're also coming off of WrestleMania weekend where, man, I watched a lot of those shows and maybe the odd buffering issue here and there, which is to be expected, but largely went uninterrupted. Yeah. And sometimes that's going to matter on the kind of building that you're in and what the situation is there. But I think your audience at home, Bruce, I don't think they really care. It's a nice gesture that they're at least issuing an apology. They're acknowledging these problems. But for the fan at home, let's also remember this is a New Japan fan that maybe subscribes to New Japan World. And this is in addition to my subscription if I want to watch this live. So it's not even a case of, hey, I've got a subscription. This is a set fee that I am spending. And it's going to create a lot of negativity and hesitation the next time that they do this next month.
I was keeping at least half an eye on the little streaming chat room that was happening in the fight feed, and there were a number of people sort of saying like, "How can I get a refund on this?" People, sort of saying, "Oh, here's the website or here's the email to contact." And there were at least a couple of people who were sort of intimating like, "Look, I'm an AEW watcher. I'm watching this because of Moxley, or I'm watching this because I know that the companies are working closer together, and I only check in with New Japan once or twice a year. This is, and this is." If this is indicative of the type of show or the type of stream that they're having, this isn't good. And it's that's a real worst case scenario for somebody who would be having that sort of experience. Again, those sorts of issues generally don't happen with New Japan World, even when you're watching it live, in my experience. So those sorts of things, when you're talking about, as you said, an extra, what was it, $20 American or something like that, which, perfectly, like this card is worth that, I would say. But yes, when it is considered to be an add-on in addition to the New Japan World subscription, it's understandable why a number of people were really peeved about it.
Getting around that, I mean, it was the top two matches. I mean, you get around those issues. Two very, very strong matches. Let's start with Jon Moxley and Will Ospreay, and it seemed like this was a match where it got over tremendously live, it sounded like, to the crowd. I thought it was an excellent match. The finish was what it was. Like, I think politically, like, there was that question going into this. And also the fact that, this to me played completely into the story that they are doing with Will Ospreay that some might have a negative reaction to. I didn't, but how did you think the match was executed, and including the finish?
Even before getting to the finish, I thought that this was a very, very well pulled off match. I think, it was a very classic, styles make fights type of build heading into it, in addition to the AEW NJPW crossover. How are people with, on paper, two very, very different approaches to pro wrestling? How are they going to gel, in the main event picture? And I thought it went wonderfully. I thought, we know that Ospreay has been, leaning towards a slightly more heavyweight style over the last year and a half, whatever it's been. And he was really able to amplify that in, striking exchanges and, some ground and pound spots, and even at a couple of moments. And then Moxley, I thought, with some of the, especially towards the end, with some of the really fantastic counters and finishing sequences, just came off completely buttery smooth in a way that you would expect of a New Japan main event with Will Ospreay in the picture sort of match that, maybe seems at odds with the rough and tumble brawling style that Moxley, plies. But I loved this match. I thought it was fantastic. It exceeded my pretty high expectations for it. I thought that they handled the like I said, the differences in styles. And then in terms of the finish, you alluded to, we knew that there would probably have to be some scenario in which both guys came out of it somewhat protected, and I thought that they pulled that off pretty darn well. This was something that really required everyone, including the ref, to have pinpoint timing, and I thought that they nailed that with the kick out right at the 3 count, and then Moxley being uncertain if it was a kick out or not, and moving into the choke. And we saw Ospreay and Zack Sabre Jr. pull that off just a couple of weeks ago in the finish of or maybe a month ago now, in the finish of the New Japan Cup, and this just seemed another really, really excellent finish in that same sort of style. And to be frank, I have to sort of suspect that we might be seeing a third one of those heading into the U.S. title match that Ospreay will be having with Tanahashi in a couple of weeks as well.
Yeah, and that was another big part of this show, was not just presenting this card for you on Saturday night, but sending you to next month with Capital Collision in Washington, D.C. And they set up a lot of big stuff. After the main event, Jon Moxley challenging Hiroshi Tanahashi, stating that either sign the contract and we fight, or I will drag you by the ponytail to Washington, which Bruce would be really tough to do when you incorporate the travel and that amount of hours on a flight with a unwilling participant with a hair pull.
Getting,
Hopefully,
holding up different, COVID vaccine passports, for him and for Tanahashi and everything. Yeah, yeah. There's a
I mean,
lot to consider there.
that is the live stream I would love to watch of him getting Tanahashi to Japan. But as well, we'll get into it. Tomohiro Ishii being challenged by Eddie Kingston, who was there live in the building, and Minoru Suzuki setting up a match with Brody King. So that's a pretty strong big three matches for next month. Are you surprised at like the level of involvement we are getting on the AEW front for these New Japan shows that, I mean, we had 2,200 or so on Saturday. Like these are, good crowds, but also pales in comparison to what a big episode of Dynamite is going to do. What have you thought of just the amount of talent that you're seeing on a night where AEW had its own television special airing? Like this is very unique to the modern era of pro wrestling.
It is, and if the trade-off is, as I kind of alluded to in my report of Windy City, the kind of the understanding that Tony Khan is allowing AEW talent to take a lot of non AEW bookings, but with the understanding that they're not going to be taking, excuse me, any clean losses, in North American soil. Given that, excuse me, I think that Moxley in particular has, we've seen him show up in so many smaller, sort of venues, right? Whether it's, kind of smaller GCW cards, kind of random spots at WrestleMania weekend here and there. So I'm not so much surprised in his case, but this is now looking to be more than just, oh, this one talent who has an opportunity to get a one-off match with somebody they'd really like to work with from the New Japan side. This is starting to look a lot more like really consciously thought out, planned co-booking of both sides, of both promotions, that probably requires a lot of conversation and interaction between Khan and Gato and all of those various entities there. So yeah, it's it's pretty darn exciting. I mean, it's coming obviously on the heels of the whole addition of AEW to New Japan World, which, I mean, I don't know. I'd be really curious to know from folks who maybe have a better sense of what kind of how viewership habits and how present AEW is in Japan. How aware the average Japanese New Japan viewer is of AEW talent and what their reactions to the first couple of episodes of Dynamite and Rampage have been thus far. But yeah, this is really starting to seem like day by day, week by week, a more completed integration or partnership between the two companies. And obviously, as travel restrictions continue to lighten, as we head into things like, Best of the Super Juniors, you have to imagine that there are going to be a number of, somewhat high profile AEW talents heading over for that tournament and, presumably for the other tournaments moving forward as well.
Yeah, those advertised for next month. So they're going to do Capital Collision on May 14th. They're at the Entertainment and Sports Arena in Washington and then doing tapings the next day. And they are advertising Okada, Tanahashi, Jon Moxley, Ishii, Will Ospreay, Minoru Suzuki, Eddie Kingston is going to be involved in this. Like these are very stacked cards for New Japan with AEW's involvement as well. And I think now that, as you mentioned, the restrictions are easing, like it feels that New Japan is now on their latest iteration of their push in the US and having a pretty willing partner in AEW, that at some point you're going to see the other side of this coin, I think, of, certain performers showing up in AEW for big promoted matches. But, you cannot understate like the involvement of AEW here in building this this US expansion of New Japan.
Yeah, and whether your Naitos and your Okadas are sort of maybe kept within mixed tag matches or things like that, rather than giving away big singles matches, right. On that show. I mean, although the question of whether or not we ever get Okada or Naito on American soil again maybe doesn't seem quite as special now after we're seeing it three times at the beginning of this year here. But yeah, like this opens up so many possibilities, and maybe this is just due to my own personal preferences here, but you have to imagine that, there's none more interesting or tantalizing than the possibility of Kenny Omega, getting to have matches with New Japan talent again, whether it's Okada, whether it's Ibushi, whatever that might be. There's a lot of really interesting and exciting opportunities. And, and it's happening at a time when I think, New Japan on their own was sort of beginning to kind of pull out of that funk that I know, like you and I have talked about many times, that was really kind of dragging around the turn of the year. I felt like the second half of the New Japan Cup really did sort of seem to finally get some attention and positive buzz back towards the company. It looks like the full capacity and non-clap crowds are right around the corner there. So the timing of it does work out very well.
Any other of some of the high points for you from Saturday's show that were lasting for you?
I really liked the Lawler Yuji Nagata match. It was just compared to just how chaotic a lot of the other like kind of big, we had a 10-man tag team match, a 6-man tag team match, a 12-man tag team match, a 6-man Chicago street fight. In amidst all of that chaos there, I thought that it was really nice to have the sort of, MMA influenced style that Lawler has been working to represent the strong open weight title match. I thought that it was really good to have that presence on there. And Nagata is obviously a fantastic opponent for that. It was a simple enough story, but really, really well done. The crowd was really into Shota Umino's kind of surprise appearance there. I'm still very much, team Uemura in terms of who I'm betting on for the future. But, after some, kind of mixed reviews, I think, of his work in Rev Pro, he looked like, pretty decent. And hey, the Scott Norton stuff was fun enough for what it was, I suppose. So, credit to him for stepping in there for a minute.
So at the same time as Windy City Riot was beginning, we had Battle of the Belts that was taped 24 hours earlier in Garland, Texas. And this was a show that I think the second time around, we saw the first version several months ago at the beginning of the year. And then going into the second one, I said it multiple times. I would say if you are sitting down and looking at 3 cards that AEW is presenting you over the course of a week, from last week's Loaded Dynamite, Texas Deathmatch on Friday, this was sort of in addition to everything else. If I have time, sure, I'll watch an hour of wrestling. But seeing the hour and how it was presented, Bruce, what is kind of your thought on Battle of the Belts, the concept?
The matches themselves, I think I'm maybe a little bit higher on than the general consensus from what I've seen. I enjoyed all 3 matches a good deal. But yeah, you're exactly right. In terms of presentation, or how does this fit into the storytelling of AEW, it very much does feel like a supplemental in addition to, sort of moment, and it did sort of feel a little bit like that the first time around. And I think especially coming on the heels of a live Rampage, in which they were obviously trying to, increase viewership, and had, this very, I think good title match, that occupied the last half of that. None of these 3 titles, have been presented in the same sort of way, or given the same sort, or at least these feuds for each of these titles hasn't been given that same sort of focus. And yeah, there was a couple of spots leading towards, Rosa and Nyla, on Dynamite and whatnot. Obviously, Gresham and Castle was just booked completely cold and outside of AEW continuity. I think there was obviously interest in the Guevara Sky match, as we were talking about last Wednesday, in terms of what it meant for the future of Sammy Guevara and Ty Conti's characters. But yes, in terms of the actual presentation, this very much just felt like AEW, the appendix, the surplus, the add-on. Once you've, gotten through all of these, if you're still hungry, get to this sometime on the weekend. And especially given the fact that it was taped, and that there were, so many spoilers and whatnot circulating through Twitter.
The news coming out, obviously, is Sammy Guevara winning the TNT title for the 3rd time. And I would say, like, if we had any question about whether they are going to fight this audience reaction, it was pretty much made clear to us that they are running with this. They made an emphasis of the 2 making out, and then even putting the "and new" graphic out on their social accounts, where it's not just Sammy holding the belt, it's him kissing Ty Conti while holding the belt. So, I mean, is this just an example of, hey, this is the reaction, we could try and fight this, or let's just go with it? We're not going to have another Cody Rhodes Brandy situation where we are fighting against the current.
It's so strange that, it was that same kind of real life pairing, or real life couple rather, that was beginning to kind of get the crowd turning on them, specifically in opposition to Lambert, and American Top Team. It's really odd that that lines up so well, and that the crowd reaction happened exactly the same. So, I can't guess as to whether or not this was always the intention, or this was always the plan. But I'm one of those people who does sort of believe that at the end of the day, Guevara is a natural heel. Like from watching his, stuff in Indies and PWG and whatnot from before he came to AEW, I think that that is always ultimately his strength. Yes, the high flying style when you want him to be, that fiery, baby face, fighting a Jericho or whoever it happens to be, it can work there. But in the long term, I do think his future and the kind of the highest peaks that he can reach will be as a heel. So yeah, I whether it was planned or not, they made the right decision, I think, in turning into the crowd's response to Tay and Sammy. Like I was saying on Wednesday, crowds hate it when couples love each other and express fondness or affection for one another in public. We can't stand that. We can't stand seeing other people happy. Apparently,
Well, no, it's there's your indictment on society as a whole. But
sad state of
afterwards,
affairs, John.
they did drop like a digital exclusive with the Men of the Year cutting these really fiery promos. Both Scorpio
Yeah.
Sky and Ethan Page, who is like a great talker, not always put in the position to be able to carry those segments when you have a Dan Lambert, but great promos from them. And then at the end, Page had like her own promo for Ty Conti, and it was like after following those two, a little tough to put her outside of her comfort zone. But at least you got the sense that there was going to be some follow up here, which is what I'm hopeful of, because I was not advocating to take the title off of Scorpio Sky so early. Like you had pushed this streak of 400 and some odd days. It just felt like a whimper to end this in the middle of this taped episode on Saturday night. So I do hope that there is follow up here, because I think both of those guys, they're great talents, and Scorpio Sky was just starting to really get that get his legs under him as a singles heel.
Absolutely. The Men of the Year stuff took a good long while to begin to feel like it had any momentum whatsoever. And even pairing them up with Lambert wasn't an instantaneous success, or at least in terms of being able to present them, Sky and Page, as, credible presences, and not just kind of the add-ons to Lambert's promos. It took so long to kind of get that moving that, yeah, I agree. I would hate to have it just have them slide back down the card and feud with God knows who later on. I thought the promos from both Page and Sky were fantastic. Lambert was kind of hanging in the background and certainly wasn't trying to hog the spotlight. You called it on Wednesday, John. Ethan Page was there to pick up the line about Sammy just saying horrible stuff about his children and what a terrible person that makes him. And again, yes, when Page puts it that way, it's one of those cases where you have, and this is a great way for face turns to work, to have legitimate grievances, that the heels, the quote heels in this case, have very, very legitimate grievances, are able to draw upon, a sense of anger and a desire for revenge that the crowd can really get behind. And yeah, both guys absolutely, absolutely nailed the promos. Yeah, as for how the segment finished, not so much. There's still some kind of training wheels happening there, I think, but that's to be expected.
And I also wanted to get some of your thoughts just going back to Friday night and the Texas Death Match between Hangman Page and Adam Cole, specifically a spot that got a lot of people talking about it, and that was the crown of barbed wire on top of Adam Cole that led to the Deadeye and the finish of the match, which when I was watching it in real time, like I did not put those factors together until Kate brought it up on the show. But this was voiced by some over the weekend of doing that spot on Good Friday. I am someone, I was raised Catholic. I am not a very religious person. This does not offend me in any way, but if somebody did you have that takeaway watching that spot? Did you have any issue with it?
I clocked it. I know I did, cotton on to it in the moment. It is somewhat different from. I think I saw a couple of people comparing it to the whole, Austin Undertaker crucifixion spot. I mean, the difference there, of course, is that Austin was the face in that spot, and Page is theoretically the face, sticking the crown on him. I mean, if I wanted to put my, humanities instructor hat on, I would sort of say, look, there's all manner of examples of art and culture which draw upon, Christian and crucifix imagery and use it in a whole variety of contexts. Uh, Drawing upon and acknowledging that sort of imagery or that sort of symbolism is not inherently, I believe, to be necessarily disrespectful, but it certainly can be taken that way if you are one of those people who believes that, pro wrestling is at the end of the day, such a quote simple or, escapist form of art that it cannot or should not, be dealing with those sorts of themes and issues, which again, art, all manner of forms of art and culture have been dealing with for millennia at this point in ways constructive and less so. It really just, I think at the end of the day, it comes down to, what your vision for pro wrestling is. It was it made me kind of chuckle and nod, but like yourself, I don't really have a lot of skin in the game or investment at a personal or spiritual level with that sort of imagery being used. So I wouldn't want to to discredit anybody who did take a little bit of offense to it.
No, and I'll also add that whether you and I had any kind of visceral reaction to it or anybody, a fan watching it, ultimately it comes down to if the wrong person looks at something like that at a network level, at a sponsor level, and that brings up the question of AEW, are you almost courting this? Like you are exposing yourself to that potential. And when you're out there and you're talking about these nefarious bots that are coming your way, and like this is the level of the dirty tactics that Tony Khan is alleging are out there, like you are really just giving people on a silver platter something to come at you with if the wrong person is offended by that. And I think like that becomes fair game when you're putting that on your programming. And if it were to religion is a very testy subject with the wrong people. So you are inviting that kind of backlash by putting that onto your programming.
Yeah, and it absolutely could. I mean, I think there's been maybe a bit too much noise made about the, I'm sorry, I don't remember her name right now, but the new incoming head of programming after the merger with, Time AOL Warner.
Right.
Oh, what if, she decides that she doesn't want blood and guts on her network, and is this just back to WCW? I think that's really been kind of overblown. But no, in a larger sense, you are right. We know that the much larger company operates at the whims, the very, very capricious whims of one single person. So yeah, and AEW has very much toyed with some touchy and controversial stuff in the past. So it is absolutely possible that there could be a little bit of blowback from this. The kind of the cynical or what about part of me would sort of say, look, this is only going to be at risk of receiving that sort of attention due to the fact that we are talking about Christian imagery in this case, that plenty of wrestling programming has been very, very and continues to be in some cases very disrespectful of other religious traditions. But yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Like this does, there are people in rooms who make decisions about these things, and it is entirely possible that this could have rubbed one of them the wrong way. And then it, kind of, I think, comes down to, how much work Tony Khan or somebody else could do in terms of smoothing that over, or, how you measure up, a potential, series of, angry phone calls into the FCC versus how much money the program draws in.
Yes. So that will conclude our Easter Monday portion of this show. I wanted to read you this quote that Paul Levesque gave to The Athletic. This was conducted over the tryouts over WrestleMania weekend, and he was asked about the rebooting of NXT. And this is, to me, the most in-depth answer we've gotten out of Paul Levesque since the switchover. And he tells The Athletic, quote, "There was this point where it was on the network, had this cult following, and we needed to get on television. How do we do that? We need more experience, need to professionalize this a little bit to make the product to where fans want to see that. We got them to that place. The pandemic messed it up a little bit because it was right when we went on TV and we had to shift our focus, doing it in front of no people. It completely altered what we were doing. We couldn't recruit or train talent for almost 2 years, but the show stayed. Then we said, okay, let's reboot it and go back to what we originally were. Some of these people won't be ready for television, but we're going to put them on television. And we believe the audience is invested enough that the numbers might come down, but a core group of them will stay. And now you're creating fresh stars all the time. That's where we are now. Maybe a little generous on creating stars all the time. The numbers have stabilized, he said. And then he cited Braun Breaker. And essentially, like he flat out says here, it truly is the developmental league. So there is nothing about this being a third brand. He flat out says this is truly a developmental league like college football, AAA baseball. They're not all quite ready to be in that major league role yet, but you're discovering them before they become household names. And he pretty much says like the mandate that we've speculated upon, it's going to be a much shorter window of them assessing talent of whether they're ready or cut bait. And the hope is that a lot of these talents you're seeing on NXT will not be here a year from now. They will be up at Raw or SmackDown. So I thought it was just an interesting, from Paul Levesque's perspective, like he is obviously going to stand by this changeover. I'm sure it's a very in-depth subject that he could go into if he was induced with truth serum. But this is essentially laying it out that, listen, we know there are some talents here that are being thrown into the deep end. That's what you're seeing on Tuesday nights.
That's really interesting. Obviously, as you're alluding to, he's not going to say, the degree to which he opposed or fought tooth and nail to have that sort of, reworking of NXT happen. But I think we can all probably, connect the dots and read between the lines there. The fact that, you have somebody, in a very, very high profile position within that company, outright stating the words developmental and making a comparison to minor league sports, that's very interesting to me from the perspective of your TV network partners and your TV contracts and your theoretical renewing or renegotiation of NXT as a television property in the short to midterm future. Every now and again, as a diehard Blue Jays fan, I will tune into single, double, or triple A games, to see prospects that I am legitimately interested in, but that takes some work. Those are streamed online. Those are not, aired on, national television networks by any stretch of the imagination. I wouldn't want to speculate, and obviously I don't know. They've stayed very mum about how much money, the NXT deal is generating for them. I think, Brandon's done some work sort of pointing out that, look, it's not really, it hasn't changed. It hasn't shifted. It's a very, very, minor part of their overall TV package. But you have to imagine that is something that could possibly be brought up, as a kind of an arbitration point or as a negotiation point, when they are trying to keep NXT theoretically on an actual broadcast network and not just as a Peacock exclusive or something like that. This AAA baseball is not what the USA signed up for when they made that deal with NXT, right? And I'd be really interested to sort of hear some internal reaction from the networks with regards to Triple H positioning in that way.
So you can check out that interview. It is up on The Athletic if you subscribe to that. Tonight on Raw, they're in Buffalo, New York, and this is going to be quite the show tonight. We have 2 weddings. We have a lie detector test, along with Finn Balor defending the United States Championship against Theory, just Theory, and then Naomi and Sasha Banks defending the women's tag titles against Liv Morgan and Rhea Ripley. So 3 hours tonight, Bruce. You are not on the clock to be joining me. Instead, John Cena has drawn the golden ticket to join me tonight to chat about that episode of Raw.
Godspeed, Jacino. I wish you all the best dealing with that. But, I guess they found out, there are some stats to back it up that, wrestling weddings do good ratings. So, but like you were saying, Lawler already burned through a lot of his jokes and a lot of his material already. So we'll have to see what they're able to come up with in terms of presenting those tonight.
Will you be watching Raw, the Raptors playoff game, or are the Jays playing tonight? What is going to
The Jays are not playing tonight. So I'm a free agent heading into tonight. I don't know if the Yankees or Boston are playing. If I could, hate watch those or something like that. But it would take a lot of boredom, I think, at this point to get me to tune into Raw. It's been a number of years since I subjected myself to that.
Before we wrap up, a couple super chats here. This is a two-parter. New Japan and to a certain extent, NWA need to get their act together when it comes to their presentations. New Japan did not look major. Is it on Fight or is it on New Japan? And he goes on to say, with Khan's announcement expected to be a super show, do you see the start of Punk, Danielson, Moxley, etc. going to Japan soon? Punk teased CMLL as a surprise. Yes, that was in response to a potential rematch with Pentagon. So a couple questions there. I would say it was broadcast on Fight, so you kind of have to look at that as like they were the streaming platform, and whether it was a building issue, that's only a speculation. But yeah, I honestly, just to give my 2 cents to that question, I think the average fan at home doesn't care. Is the stream working or is the stream not working? I've spent my money, and I don't know if any reasons are going to justify it to the fan at home that has spent their money. And more importantly, we always talk about, they have spent their time. They have earmarked 3 hours out of their night to watch this. And that's great that the feed is up later. It's a clean show afterward, but I earmarked my Saturday night to watch this. So, I think like there is some leeway that you give as a consumer, but not a whole lot, especially when you're paying more for this and do not encounter these problems on a live New Japan World broadcast typically.
Yeah, exactly. The fact that there was absolutely no problems with New Japan's own broadcast, I think kind of, connects the dots on that one. So yeah, it was unfortunate. With regards to, what AEW talent we're going to see, I mean, it's obviously it's tantalizing, it's fascinating, and I think kind of to my point earlier about Moxley, some of it is going to have to depend on what sort of appetites, what sort of interests, what sorts of bucket lists or dream matches various people on the AEW side have, and obviously I think on the New Japan side as well. Obviously Danielson in the G1 is something that was speculated even from well before he parted ways with the WWE. We just heard on the long and winding Royal Road, Eddie Kingston sort of laying out a list of possible Japanese opponents that he would like to have. You have Shingo, who has been running commentary for New Japan's broadcast of the AEW shows, openly saying, "Oh, I've been hugely influenced by a large number of American wrestlers such as X, Y, and Z. And I would love to have matches with a lot of these AEW guys and whatnot." I haven't heard Punk. I haven't heard him seen the comments he made regarding CMLL in particular, and obviously, there are a number of one-off, Punk Okada, just grabbing at that. Obviously, that could be a major match. I don't know. Again, I'm not sure the degree to which the Japanese audience is tracking AEW and how highly regarded Punk would be by that audience. But it's very, very interesting for me. As somebody who just at the end of the day is a bit of a work rate geek. Yeah, the stuff like Danielson in the G1, and Shingo maybe kind of reprising some of those. I mean, his stuff in PWG when he was over in North America from a few years ago was fantastic. I'd love to see him mix it up stateside.
And there's also like a great lesson I think that we can learn from the AEW roster is that unfortunate that he has all these injuries to deal with, but for Kenny Omega, what a refresh to have this many months off and comes back reheated, can come in a totally different set of scenarios, new matches. That's the idea of sending someone to a G1 for a month and then they come back and it's like you've still got your eye on this person. They're off in this tournament that hopefully there's a lot more attention on the G1 this year. Mm-hmm. And then they come back and it's almost like they're kind of refreshed coming back to AEW, that you can take a guy off for 5 weeks and it's not going to cause AEW to fall apart. Like they have the depth that they can enter these kind of things. And I don't think it's going to hurt your show if you take even a prominent name and they go off to do the G1. So there's a lot of interesting options.
There's apparently, I just, Voices of Wrestling was reporting that apparently Takeshita, I mean, we're talking DDT rather than NJPW, but apparently his excursion to the States is kind of penciled in for a full year. So we might be getting him being a very, very prominent presence on AEW programming. And, for those who, understandably perhaps dismiss DDT as a bunch of, silly comedy stuff, I implore you to take a look at some of the recent singles matches that he has been working, because he will be a very, very welcome presence on AEW.
Last super chat goes to Chris Ely. I am agnostic Agnostic AF, but I can understand why people would be offended by the barbed wire crown of thorns. I do not think stuff like this will endear them to sponsors, and that's the thing, is that there might be, and I have not seen like a giant outcry over this, but there was some over the weekend. But it ultimately comes down, if there is a sponsor that for whatever reason may not have known that's coming, and you're attached to this, those are the kinds of people you just don't want to be upsetting or creating some kind of pattern of just that's the type of thing. Like I would imagine that the network knew that that was going to be something that was there. It was a live show, but again, you're putting that out there. It does come with the risk of blowback from the wrong people, and fan outcry is not necessarily going to be that terrible blowback. But yeah, you upset a sponsor or you upset someone at a network level, that's the kind of thing you don't want to be courting. So yeah, we kind of made our thoughts known there. That is going to wrap up things for today's show. I want to alert people that up on the site now we have a Q&A with Guy Evans, who is the author of the Nitro book. They have just put out an expanded edition going through the history of WCW, interviewing many of the executives that worked at Turner and Time Warner and AOL, which I'm reading this fascinating book on the AOL Time Warner merger. Just an absolute fascinating disaster to look back in the history, which was the largest buyout in or merger in U.S. history at the time in 2000 when it was first announced. But that is up on the site. That Q&A you can go check out now. And then I'm going to be back tonight with John Cena, 11:05 Eastern, here on the channel, so you can check that out. And then Tuesday we've got Rewind Away coming your way, where myself, Phil Chairtalk, and Eric Marcotte are going back to review Elite XC on CBS television. If you want to talk about standards and practices and the network embracing MMA in 2008, this was a fascinating debut for Elite XC on network television, a year into the company's run and just a few months before the demise of Elite XC. So that'll be a very interesting show to go through. And we will be back with the news show tomorrow in this same spot. Karen Peterson from the site is going to join us. She was there at Windy City Riot on Saturday, so we'll get some of her live thoughts being in the building in Villa Park, Illinois. But Bruce, the last word goes to you. It's been great to have you on, not just for this, but also last week's Rewind to Dynamite. And what is going on in your world, and where can people follow all of your work?
I don't want to do the entire whole spiel again because I did just do it on Wednesday, but you can find me on Twitter at Contrasoma. That's CONTRASOMA. In addition to the Windy City Riot write-up that I just had up on the website, the new episode of Postmarks just came out last Saturday, in which myself and David Myers were speaking with Colby John, the author, composer, and rapper of the theme song that you hear every Tuesday morning. Had a fun chat with him about music, fatherhood, all sorts of stuff like that. As always, my main hustle, the website and podcast that I run dealing with goth and industrial music, is over at idiudie.com, and the podcast is called We Have a Technical, special guest spot from Wei Ting on our 400th episode. It does look like there are a couple of other super chats in the chat there, John, that have been added. I don't know if we want to tackle those or not.
We have from Easy Attack: in my humble opinion, NXT 2.0 is complete garbage. After Triple H's explanation, I still do not know what it is supposed to be. I don't have many questions about what it's supposed to be. It is supposed to be a fast track to the main roster, heavily character-based, involving a lot of inexperienced talent and some that have been successes in terms of Carmelo Hayes, Braun Breaker, and others that, have not been so successful that you have seen either kind of weeded out or a diminished role. But I understand the thinking. Is it the best hour of or 2 hours of television each week? Far from it. But I do see what they are going with.
I guess the thing for me is this the sort of stuff that should be being broadcast to a national audience, right? Like, if this is the first point of contact that, the larger WWE universe is having with some of these talents that you maybe do have earmarked, or that you do see as having a really, really great future ahead of them. There's a big difference between somebody getting some seasoning, on a certain circuit, just, for a live audience of 100 or 200 people, working through the kinks and kind of getting through that. There's a big difference between, a band just sending their demos around or playing in front of a small live crowd and sort of figuring out how to tighten up their music, versus having those very early rough demos put out on a major label and put out to everybody. when that is the first impression that is often made of them. But maybe it's just a case where they imagine that they have such a wide talent pool, or that the road to getting to the main roster is now so short, so fast, so elevated, that it is just immediately you're thrown in the deep end. You got a month or two, sink or swim. That's it. We don't have time to mess around. Which is maybe unfortunate for some folks who would develop, maybe more slowly or more quietly. But it's not what they're looking for.
Bruce, thank you very much for joining me. That is going to be it for your post-daily news show. We will speak with you tonight, 11:05 p.m. Eastern Time, as we give the most extensive rundown of the lie detector and double weddings, as John Cena will join me as we go through Raw from Buffalo. That is it. Thank you to everybody for tuning in.